I am Margaret, and I am 67 years old. For most of my life, I was a teacher, a wife, and a mother who thought that showing up was enough to hold a family together. Last week, I stepped off a red-eye flight from Florida into the bright chaos of LAX and realized how wrong I had been. My daughter Melissa had promised to meet me at baggage claim. I had reminded her twice the night before, and once again before boarding. My phone still held her last text, a little heart at the end of her sentence that made me think everything was fine. The plane landed late. By the time I reached the carousel, my back was stiff from the cramped seat, and the weight of my carry-on cut into my shoulder. Around me, people were greeting one another with flowers, hugs, and signs. I stood by the pillar under the blue sign marked 5, a rolling suitcase at my feet, and another bag balanced against my knee. The crowd thinned until only airport staff and a janitor with a mop were left. I called her once. It rang. I called again, straight to voicemail. By the third call, my hands were trembling, partly from exhaustion, partly from the creeping feeling that I was not going to be met. On the fourth try, she answered. Her voice was flat, rushed, as if I were a telemarketer interrupting her day. She told me she was busy, that Uber existed, and that I was not helpless. In the background, I could hear music and laughter, not traffic. My throat tightened, but no words came out. She hung up before I could explain how heavy my bags were or how sore my legs felt after sitting for 5 hours. I stood there for another 20 minutes, staring at the sliding doors. People streamed out to the curb where cars idled, trunks popped open, and children ran to their parents. I was alone with 2 suitcases and a tote full of gifts I had picked up for her on my trip. The straps dug into my palms as I dragged them toward the exit. Outside, the air smelled like gasoline and sea salt. Taxis honked. Shuttle drivers called destinations. I felt like an afterthought in my own life. I told myself not to cry. I am not helpless. I am not helpless. But each step toward the rideshare line felt like a little erasure, as if a lifetime of showing up had been scrubbed away in one casual phone call. That was the moment I understood that something inside me had shifted. I was no longer a mother waiting for her child. I was a woman standing in an airport with heavy bags and a decision to make. When I got back to the house, I noticed the porch light had been changed to one of those smart bulbs that glowed pale blue. The little ceramic frog I had placed by the steps years ago was gone. Inside, the air smelled different, sharper, like diffusers and lavender mist, not the cinnamon and cedar I used to keep tucked behind the curtains. Melissa wasn't home. Her car was gone, and the kitchen was dark. I wheeled my suitcase to my room, only to find the door half open and a whiteboard leaning against the wall with the words content schedule scrawled across it. The sewing table I used to mend our clothes had vanished. In its place was a ring light, a tripod, and a desk covered in makeup, microphones, and a neon sign that said, "Speak your truth." My bed had been pushed against the corner and covered in throw pillows with hashtags stitched across them. I sat down slowly. The mattress felt thinner, like it hadn't been slept on in weeks. On the wall above me, the photos were missing. Michael and I were in front of our first apartment, the beach trip with Melissa at 7, all gone. I walked through the house, trying not to notice what was missing. In the hallway, my framed cross-stitch piece had been replaced by a print of someone posing with angel wings and a quote about energy. Even the magnets on the fridge had changed. No more postcards, just square Polaroids of Melissa, smiling in coffee shops with people I didn't recognize. Her friends came over often now. They walked in laughing, holding smoothies and filming everything on their phones. Once, one of them passed me in the hallway and said in a fake whisper to another, "Is that her?" I smiled, trying not to shrink. Another time, I overheard them in the kitchen, talking about how my presence made the vibe weird. One of them said I gave off legacy furniture energy. I started eating in my room. Not because anyone told me to, but because the conversations at the dinner table became harder to join. They were always about metrics, brands, and followers. I stopped understanding what they were measuring. One evening, I tried to suggest adding more vegetables to the meal. Melissa didn't look up from her phone. She just said, "Mom, this is kind of how we eat now. You don't have to make it a thing." I nodded, even though I hadn't made it a thing. A week later, I walked into the living room and saw her filming a live Q&A. I froze when I heard her say, "Sometimes you just outgrow people. Even if they're family. They don't mean to hold you back. They just kind of take up space." I stood there for a moment, invisible in my own home. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding a photo I had found stuffed behind a drawer. It was of Melissa, on her 10th birthday, frosting on her cheeks, her arms wrapped around me like I was the whole world. I stared at it and tried to remember what it felt like to be needed, to be known. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the quiet of being slowly erased. It started with a notification I wasn't meant to see. Melissa had borrowed my laptop to upload something and forgot to sign out of her messaging app. The icon popped up while I was trying to pay a utility bill, just a flicker in the corner of the screen, but the message preview stopped me cold. It read, "Wait till you see the airport bit." I clicked it before I could talk myself out of it. The group chat was named Content Coven, and it was filled with screenshots, jokes, and clips. They were all about me. Pictures of my slippers, my handwriting, a blurry shot of me reaching for a jar on the top shelf, captioned, "Boomer battles gravity." My chest tightened as I scrolled. Then I saw the video. It was grainy and vertical, filmed on a phone. Melissa had on a gray cardigan, one of mine. She hunched her back, clutched a purse too big for her frame, and dragged a suitcase behind her like a limp limb. Her voice trembled as she said, "Melissa, are you there? I don't know where to go. I'm so scared." Laughter filled the background. Someone off camera shouted, "Give her the Oscar!" She did a fake sob and sniffled into a tissue, then collapsed onto a couch, moaning. "My legs are made of pudding." I watched in silence as she replayed my worst moment, like it was stand-up comedy. The comments underneath were worse. They called me dramatic, a fossil, and said I was milking my age like it was currency. One girl wrote, "Honestly, if my mom pulled that, I'd block her and change my number." Another replied, "Bet," she cried into her knitting. I closed the laptop slowly. My mouth was dry and my hands felt cold, even though the room was warm. For a long time, I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there and listened to the tick of the hallway clock and the hum of the refrigerator, trying to ground myself in anything that felt real. Later that night, I opened the laptop again. I took screenshots of the messages, the video, and the usernames. I saved them to a folder and backed it up to a flash drive I kept in my jewelry box. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I just knew I needed proof. It wasn't about revenge. Not then. It was about remembering that I wasn't losing my mind, that I hadn't imagined the cruelty, that somewhere inside this house, I was still a person who deserved respect, even if the people closest to me had forgotten that. I didn't say a word to Melissa. The next morning, she smiled like nothing had happened and asked if I wanted to help rearrange her filming space. I said I was tired. I kept my voice even and my hands steady. Inside me, something had gone quiet, but not broken. It was the silence of a door closing softly and locking from the inside. Michael always believed in being prepared. He was never paranoid, just practical in that quiet, steady way some men are. I remember him telling me once, after a tense dinner with Melissa during her college years, never give everything away, especially to someone who might forget what it cost you to build it. He wasn't bitter, just observant. He had grown up in a family where inheritance became warfare, and he didn't want that for us. When he got sick, he called an old friend who worked in estate law and had documents drawn up that gave me full authority over all assets. "In case," he said, "you're ever treated like a guest in your own life." I kept them locked away in a safe we bolted into the wall behind the linen closet. For years, I forgot they were even there. I never thought I'd need them. Michael passed 10 years ago, and even now, I still expect to hear his footsteps creak across the floor when it gets too quiet at night. That morning, after saving the screenshots and packing away the flash drive, I went to the closet and pulled back the stack of towels that had covered the safe since the year he died. My hands hesitated over the dial, not because I had forgotten the combination, but because opening it meant accepting something I hadn't wanted to name. The metal door swung open with a quiet click. Inside were three things: our marriage certificate, a velvet pouch that held his watch, and the envelope with the amended deed and instructions. His handwriting was still so familiar. Even the way he looped the M in my name made my throat tighten. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and read every line. Then I folded the papers, placed them in a folder, and whispered one word to the empty room: enough. I watched the video again that night, not because I needed to feel the sting of it, but because I needed to see it without flinching. Melissa's cardigan curled around her shoulders like a costume, her voice dripping with imitation. The laughter in the background wasn't just noise anymore. It was a signal. They weren't careless. They were comfortable. The laptop light cast a pale glow across the room, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. I sat still, hands folded, breathing slow and even. The pain was still there, but it had settled into something harder, something with edges. Around midnight, I stood up, walked to the closet, and opened the safe again. The envelope was already in the folder, the documents crisp and ready. I stared at Michael's signature for a moment, then took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I had been avoiding. It rang twice. Then a familiar voice answered, older now but still steady. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. She said she could be at my door by morning. I told her I'd be ready. I placed the phone down gently on the nightstand. Then I turned off the video, closed the laptop, and sat on the edge of the bed, with my feet flat against the floor. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of the heater kicking on. I didn't feel afraid. My hands rested on the folder in my lap. They weren't shaking anymore. I looked at the door, then at the ceiling, and whispered what I knew was the beginning of everything. Let's initiate a transfer. She found the envelope before I said a word. It had arrived that morning by courier, addressed to me but opened by her. I heard the footsteps before I saw her, fast and frantic across the hardwood floor. The door to my room flew open, and she was standing there, papers clutched in her hands, her voice rising before I even looked up. She asked if it was real, if I had actually hired a lawyer, if I had truly transferred the house and everything else out of her name. I said nothing at first. I just folded the sweater I was packing and set it neatly into the suitcase beside me. She called it betrayal. Said I was overreacting. Said it was just a joke. That people laugh at their parents online all the time. Her eyes were wide, and for the first time in years, she looked young. Not powerful, not polished, just small and stunned. I told her to sit. She didn't. She started pacing, talking faster, throwing out excuses like darts that never landed. I let her speak. She asked why I didn't just tell her how I felt, why I had to go behind her back. She said she didn't mean to hurt me. I nodded but said nothing. Then she said something that stopped me. You're ruining my life over one stupid video. My hand stilled on the zipper of the suitcase. I turned and walked to the drawer, pulled out the flash drive I had labeled in blue ink. I held it up between us. This, I said, isn't about revenge. It's about reflection. I handed it to her without emotion, without ceremony. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked at her and said, I need you to see what I saw. She took the drive with fingers that trembled. Her mouth opened like she wanted to say something more, but nothing came out. I stepped aside and let her leave the room. That was the last time I stood still for her tears. The apology never came. But that day, I stopped waiting for it. I had already started moving forward, and I wasn't looking back. I moved out a week after the documents were finalized. No drama. No shouting. I left the keys on the kitchen counter beside a note that simply said, "I wish you well," and closed the door behind me for good. With the help of my lawyer and a small nonprofit in town, I bought an old craftsman house on the edge of downtown. It had peeling paint, creaky floors, and a backyard that needed love. But the light in the front room was perfect in the afternoon, and I knew right away it was the right place to begin again. We called it the Quiet Nest, a home for women like me, older women pushed out of their homes, forgotten by family, or just looking for somewhere they could breathe without apology. We opened our doors in spring with just 4 beds, a shared kitchen, and a living room that smelled faintly of lemon balm and books. I taught sewing in the mornings, simple things at first. Buttons, hems, then pillowcases and skirts. On Thursdays, we baked. On Fridays, we had a workshop called Proof and Peace, where I taught them how to write their own wills, track their assets, and build something no one could erase. Some of the women still flinched when the doorbell rang. Some couldn't meet your eyes when you handed them a plate. But week by week, the silence began to soften. There was laughter in the kitchen, music in the hall, life in the walls again. Word got around quickly. Local churches donated linens. A retired nurse dropped off first aid kits and herbal teas. One teenager painted a mural on the side of the house with wildflowers and the words, "You are still here." That meant more than anyone knew. Meanwhile, Melissa started a GoFundMe. She titled it, "Starting Over After a Family Betrayal." The photos she posted were filtered in soft light, her eyes sad, her captions vague. She blamed a misunderstanding, claimed she had been taken out of context. For a moment, it worked. She raised a few $100s. Comments rolled in, some sympathetic. But then the video surfaced. I never released it. Someone else did. Maybe someone from the group chat had second thoughts. Maybe a stranger who saved it when she posted it months ago. It didn't matter who. It only mattered that it was out. Melissa dressed like me, mocked me, laughed while her friends clapped in the background. The comments on her fundraiser changed overnight. They called her cruel, shallow, performative. They quoted her lines and asked if she was still proud of them. She shut down the fundraiser within 2 days. Posted one last message that said she needed space and privacy. I gave her both. I didn't respond. I didn't gloat. I just folded another piece of fabric and showed a woman named Eileen how to thread a needle with steady hands. That was the beginning of the real healing. Not because she suffered, but because I stopped centering my life around her choices. My days became full in a different way. There was work to do, rooms to warm, lives to unbury, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt whole. Quiet, but whole. The wind was gentle that afternoon, tugging softly at the edge of the blanket draped across my knees. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the trees shed their leaves in slow spirals across the lawn. The sky was the kind of pale gray that made everything feel quieter. One of the younger women, new to the house, sat beside me. She didn't ask much, just watched the breeze for a while, then turned to me and said, "Would you ever let your daughter come back?" I didn't answer right away. I sipped my tea and listened to the wind move through the chimes. "Maybe," I said. "But this time, I'll be the one deciding if the door opens." Then I looked back out at the trees and let the quiet settle between us. Not heavy, not sad, just mine.